Buddy, thank you so much for joining us. My name is Mark Friedenthal. I'm the founder and CEO of Tollerisk. For those not familiar with Tollerisk, we provide client risk profiling technology designed specifically for the fiduciary process. Unlike legacy client profiling tools, Tollerisk is not just a personality profile, but also incorporates the client's financial data to measure their financial ability to take risk. Tollerisk uses a simple stocks to bonds benchmark scale and uber simple visuals to make it easy for clients to understand. If you haven't seen Tollerisk recently, please reach out to us, sales@tollerisk.com, and we're happy to schedule a demonstration so you can see how advisors use Tollerisk to accelerate practice growth and reduce compliance risk. And if you haven't seen it yet, check out the latest T3 Inside Information survey. You'll see our crazy user ratings and why everybody is all abuzz. And okay, that's enough of my shameless plug as your sponsor today. I am very proud to introduce our thought leader speaker for this afternoon. Mark Gilbert is the CEO and co-founder of Zox, which is an AI-powered platform designed primarily for financial advisors, which automatically captures key details from client conversations during meetings, generates summaries, action items, follow-up emails without requiring recordings, essentially acting as a virtual meeting assistant to streamline the client engagement process. Zox serves more than 1,000 financial services firms, growing rapidly, and is proud to operate with the highest standards for privacy and security in the industry. Now, prior to Zox, Mark served as VP of Product at Twilio. He was CTO at Hearsay Systems and held various product management roles at Microsoft. So his tech blood runs very deep. We are so privileged to have Mark here with us today, as AI is such a hot topic. Please share your questions for Mark by typing them in the box. We do have a very big group today, so microphones are off, but you can type your questions in the box. Jan from our customer support team is monitoring your questions. She'll chime in and relay questions for Mark so that everybody, including Mark, can hear those questions. And for those of you submitting CE credit, for CFP, AIF, etc., please remember to stay engaged and attentive for at least 50 minutes. That's what you'll need to do for credit. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Mark Gilbert. Mark, thank you so much for joining us.
Awesome. Thanks, Mark. It's great to be here, and I really appreciate the opportunity.
Absolutely. I mean, AI can take us in so many different directions. I feel like you and I don't know if we're exactly the same vintage, but I remember, early AI was really very data and mathematically driven. We used to build these behemoth kind of models, in the 90s. Now AI for people is so different. We have these large language models. We have AI for visualization. Adobe runs that commercial where you just remove somebody, and it's using AI in the background to say, what do we think is behind this image that we're removing based on the colors and the shadows and all the different other data collected in those pictures. So, maybe you could start off by telling us a little bit about kind of AI in the realm that you see most prevalent today, and obviously our audience are financial advisors, investment advisors. So kind of with that lens, what parts of AI are we usually talking about in today's kind of landscape?
Yeah, so there was, as you said, I think you and I are probably of a similar vintage. So, we've seen AI kind of in a variety of different instantiations over time. And I think up until a few years ago, was really around mostly numerical prediction, right? So like something would happen and then we could tell you, like, given this pattern, this is most likely the number that's going to come out. There were a number of breakthroughs in the mid 2010s that really led to something that we call like zero shot learning, zero shot models. Like there's BERT models that came out of Google, and then people have probably even heard this now pretty broadly outside of the tech space, but this concept of a transformer. And that all led to what we now call large language models. And the huge difference, I would say, was before what we had to do is you would have to take like, tens of thousands of points from a specific problem to try to guess like the 10,001st answer. And now what's happened is essentially there's been enough training across common language, like that's why these are called large language models, as well as similarly in the imagery space, where essentially you can take a system with no additional training or no specific training on a topic, give it, English and essentially these, or any language for that matter. And these models now understand like basically verbal language, right? Very, very surprisingly accurately. And so when we look at what we do with Zox, when we look at a lot of the growth that's happened in the last, couple of years, most of it is in this, what we call the large language model space. So it's like, as people have heard of OpenAI or an Anthropic or these types of things, these are all large language models.
DeepSeek.
DeepSeek is the new one. We're now late January, and so it is out. And I think Tencent actually had just released a model this morning as well, like in China.
This is how everyone knows this is live. We could have held up a newspaper, or we could just say DeepSeek, and
yeah, exactly. 7 days ago, no one knew what that was, and now it's tanking the stock market. But I think what everyone is seeing, which is so powerful, is because we now, like for me, where I've worked in communication for quite a while, we can now look into these communications, like discussions exactly like we're having here, or if we were in person, in the same room. And the AI systems, these large language models actually start to understand what's going on. And that allows us to do a whole bunch of, frankly, really cool things that computers just would have struggled with before.
So specifically in financial services, because I know that's our audience, and I think generally yours too.
Yeah.
In financial services, privacy and security are really paramount. What are the biggest challenges that face financial services advisors, wealth management, in using AI, which is changing so rapidly, even in the last year or 2 years, it's changed so rapidly with these LLMs. Where do we have to be concerned about privacy and security? What are the kinds of things advisors need to focus on? And are people too worried? Is there such a thing as being too worried?
Yeah, I'm not sure you can be too worried. With I would say the trade-off of like the people who are using these technologies, like you mentioned at the start, we have like over 1,000 firms. We launched under a year ago and have over 1,000 firms on the platform, and it has
amazing
full effect on like productivity and client service. But yeah, we break down really the privacy and compliance and security into 4 areas. Some of them will sound familiar and some of them are new. Maybe starting with the familiar ones. For what we do, we listen to client conversations, and that can have extremely private information in it. So we designed our platform specifically to not record or create recordings. The advisor has full control over the data, so they can erase something if they want, all of those types of things. But regardless, these conversations that have always been private can have very, very sensitive information. And I think, as AI gets into all these different areas, you just have to be very thoughtful with any vendors you're using around what are they doing for security, where is that data going, where is it sitting, and what control do you, the advisor or the firm, have over it. So that's a pretty big piece. In AI, another huge thing you'll hear about is training. And so I mentioned earlier that these models essentially train on a whole, virtually the internet. But you need to be worried about your data being used for training. And the main reason for that is slightly oversimplistic, but if we're training a model, let's say, Mark, and I have a discussion with you and you're in New Jersey, and I say, hey, for the average founder of a fintech company in New Jersey, what would happen, blah, 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 blah. There's a chance that the model will actually start to generate your specific data that was trained, because that's essentially what it knows. And so you'll see there's a lot of concern around are people training with the data. I would say in financial services, just frankly, you never want any vendor training with your data. Just it's that easy. You just kind of want to make sure it's not happening.
I mean, that seems obvious, right? Why would you want that? You mentioned that you don't record. I mean, obviously there's some type of voice to text. There's some transcript, if you will. There's some place that has to get ingested, whether it's your model or it's ChatGPT or whatever else is out there. Are you saying that in your case, you ingest it, produce an output, and then essentially destroy it? I mean, it had to exist at some moment in time, right?
Yeah, so the way it works with us is so, like we've been talking now for about 10 minutes, right? And if we were using our system, the audio from the start of that conversation all the way up through like 9.5 minutes wouldn't exist anywhere. And so what we do is the same way that like a cell phone, if you call overseas, takes the audio and kind of into little chunks, they send the chunk. So we get the chunk, we transcribe it exactly as you said, and then we look in that for data. We're looking for like, is there a financial asset discussed? Is there a value? Is there personal information you need? But then all of the raw data, if you will, is flushed, like it's never stored disk. There's never a full instantiation
I
of
see.
or anything like that. And it matters for two big reasons I think we see. One is just from a legal point of view, you don't end up with a discoverable recording because I think there's concerns of like, if you're recording things with clients and then erasing them, if they
And
want to.
in some states, you need both parties' consent.
Yep, you need both parties' consent. We would still recommend, like obviously advisors have a huge trust with their clients. So we recommend that you're telling them you're using these systems to make sure they're comfortable. But again, what we've seen is for someone using us to go in and say, look, there's no audio or video recording. I fully control the data. If you say something that, we don't want a record of, I'll just delete it. The vast majority of clients are okay with that. And it's pretty different if you're actually recording, right? Like if you're in Zoom or one of these systems and you hit record and there's a big red button, big red light, sorry. I think there's a concern that a lot of people have around that. And then there's also, frankly, a concern of will your client be as open with you, or are they going to kind of hold back a bit because they're worried, about that. So yeah, we essentially listen to it in, we call it real time. For computer scientists, it's not really real time. It's more like seconds, not seconds. And then listen to all that and essentially are taking the data out that they want. And
So
yeah, analyzing it that way.
I have long since believed that, all of our cell phones are listening to us. I mean, we know it. I mean, they have a wake word, so someplace they're listening to all the words to see if they find the wake word,
Yep.
And I think a lot of people found some interesting, maybe bizarre. I'm not one who gets overly concerned about this, but we have a conversation and then we start searching for something in Google, and before you get to any specific words, it seems to know what you're looking for. And again, I don't really care, but it does seem like it's really listening. And I don't know whether someplace on my iPhone I signed away permission for Siri to record or collect or things like that. Do you think with these big providers, Apple, Google, and the likes, are there recordings out there? Is there data out there that could be quite personal that we should be worried about, or do we think that they're operating with similar protocol to you, where they're getting these buffered chunks and they might be ingesting it or utilizing it in some way, but not actually keeping it in a way that might make somebody fearful?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. I would say I would look at the different vendors, and I think at the end of the day, you can also look at their reputation and how much that matters to them, and then also what their business is, right? So like Apple's a good example where I would say Apple has done a number of things to hold privacy. Like they've taken a very pro-privacy line even when it's unpopular. Like they had some issues, like not issues, but essentially like kind of a back and forth. I think it was about 5 or 6 years ago with the FBI on different things, and they're like, look, we don't have access to this. And you would assume kind of Google would do the same as well. Like obviously the brand is very important to them. So I think misusing the data is, you definitely hope they're not doing that. You do have to watch a little bit, if it's an advertising company, like Meta's an advertising company, Google's an advertising company. And I think we've all had that experience where, maybe you and I are talking around taking a vacation to like the Bahamas or something, and then we log into our laptop, later that night, and there's like flights to the Bahamas, and we're like, oh. And so, like the amount of data out there is phenomenal, and even if it's not recordings, like there are what people call these digital breadcrumbs that are out there that matter a lot, right? Like it's a huge deal with privacy, like just even Google Maps and your locations and everything else, and like it knows everywhere you've been essentially. So you do have to be cautious of it, and I think especially in this case, in financial services, bringing it back to your clients, like you have to be very thoughtful about what you do with your clients' information and what you're exposing them to. Because it's one thing for you to do something yourself, it's another thing for you essentially to expose your clients to some of these things that can be very impactful.
So I know this is a moving target, and AI is moving very, very quickly. What do you think the next 6 to 12 months really brings about for sort of evolving AI type tech? Any is that a reasonable period of time to have a reasonable expectation? I'm going to ask you a longer time period, but I know that's speculative.
Yeah, it is. Like I think 6 to 12 months is actually pretty realistic because I think a lot of those things are already kind of in flight now. I think what a lot of people don't realize with AI is that, as we look at it, we see these step functions of like, let's say ChatGPT 3 launching or something like that. AI, really since about the mid 2015s has just been on a continual growth curve that's just straight up and to the right. And so what ends up happening is there's a lot of different capabilities that look like they come out all of a sudden, but the reality is what's happening is like these models are actually just getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and then they hit a certain point where they can solve a certain new type of problem. So if you look at the types of things that have come out in the last few months, I'll say the last 6 months, I think you're going to start to see those used a lot more. And then there are some that will that are just coming out now. But like just to go through a few of those, right? We've seen this creation of what we would call the advanced reasoning model. So these models that may take a minute to think because they're actually asking themselves a bunch of questions. And they can do like very much like what you would call multi-stage reasoning. So you can say like, look at all the banks in the US, figure out who has the most at-risk balance sheet, list them all out, and then tell us, what the chances you think of, like defaulting on, their loans or something. And that, was like impossible 12, 18 months ago. And now the models are actually doing quite well with that. Like I'm in San Francisco, we have and have had really for the last 6 to 9 months, full self-driving, autonomous cars, not Tesla.
Like Waymo.
Get in Waymos and we just use them all the time now, frankly, because they're better. They're nicer, they're like it's smoother, and and it's funny, we have our some new employees in town this week, and I just like hopped in a Waymo, not even thinking about it, and they're just like floored at the whole thing. But you're just like, yep, like this is just now normal.
It's amazing, and I have 2 teenage daughters, one of whom is in driver's ed right now, and I have a Tesla with fully autonomous driving, and I can guarantee you, it's not, besides being safer than me driving, because it is, it's undoubtedly significantly safer than a new teenage driver. And Absolutely. I wrestle with wanting my daughter to actually learn to drive, because if I let her drive this and she just clicks it on, then in that environment where she needs to take control of the wheel, she's not going to really have the experience to do it. And I'm sure in a few more years, it'll be so irrelevant, it won't matter. But right now, I feel like we're still in that transitional stage, at least with cars, and I know it's changing rapidly, but the way my parents made me learn how to drive a stick shift, right? I had to learn a manual transmission, because if you were out with a group and you were the sober driver and the car that was available to drive home was a manual transmission, you needed to learn how to drive it. I would never dream of making my kids learn how to drive a stick now. It seems irrelevant for most purposes, but to actually drive the car, I feel like they still need to learn. So we're going to keep going through, I think, this rapid transition in so many areas, but that was a really very personally relevant one for me.
Yeah, it's very slow, and then quick, right? Like I have a teenager as well who just got his license, and it's very similar. Like I don't even think I could find a standard, to teach him manual on anymore. But no, it's huge, and like every car, pretty much now, any modern, like newer car has some assist, right? That's pretty,
right.
Pretty, 5 years ago would have been impressive. So I think we see those, and then the other huge thing I think you're going to see in 6 months is really multimodal. So like we've seen this on input to AI where, something can take an image plus a bunch of text or a song and tell you what's going on. And I think you can probably have already started to see a few demos here, but you'll see the same on the output. And so like one of the things we're looking at with financial services is we have all this data that's super valuable about the client. We can help out and do all those things. But as you know, there's a lot of old systems hanging around, frankly. Those systems often don't have APIs. They don't have these other, like frankly, interoperability. And so we do see a situation where we can start to actually take the AI models and actually almost like drive the keyboard and mouse. So it's like, hey, you can take this data and start to fill in this, like frankly, almost mainframe-esque, like COBOL type app that may be sitting behind a web page, or, have a web page in front of it. And so I think you're going to see those. And I think for us, like specifically in financial services, I think the advanced reasoning, and I think this multimodal thing is going to be quite large, right? Just, like I think very shortly, even we're already almost there, right? Like the notion of someone taking a tax return, or like, a long, whatever, like life insurance policy, and read through it and starting to type the data out of it. Like, it's just like, boom, and it goes, and that'll just get smarter and smarter, like with more malformed documents and all of those things.
Imagine what it does for legislation, right? Imagine, I mean, look at all the congressional bills. You look at it and say, this has 12,000 pages. Nobody actually read it on the Congress's floor. Somebody's going to scan that into an LLM and get something that everybody can digest. Now, we end up really placing a lot of responsibility on that. And I do think that there are a number of cases out there where there's, I think what it was called, like hallucinations, right?
Yep.
Where AI does extrapolate to some degree. And if you don't know, in fact, I think some of them have been legal case references, if I'm not mistaken. I think there's a big risk too in relying solely on it at this point. Now, maybe in the future we'll get to a point where that doesn't seem like it's a big risk, but it feels like it's a pretty big risk now. I think in the case of advisors, looking at a summary from Zox or ChatGPT or some other source, they can look at it and they can probably quickly ascertain, is there a mistake here? Is there something that didn't get transcribed correctly? Or they can edit. I look at what we did, and obviously we don't do what you guys do, but in the client risk profiling space, we arm advisors to communicate with clients, and people learn in different ways. And so our advisors are constantly placed in the role of being educators, right? And because people learn in different ways, they have to be flexible and they have to reach people in different ways. So, some clients learn through math, data, statistics. That would be me, right? Give me some statistics, right? But not everybody. Somebody else, charts and graphs are going to be more digestible, more understandable. Well, for some people, a narrative is much more understandable. Explain to me what is happening here. So our first foray into using AI takes the data collected, whether it's through interviewing the client or it's through getting it from their favorite financial planning, money guide kind of exercise, or whether they sent a fact finder link to the client, or maybe one day we'll get a Zox Risk integration and they can talk to it and it'll populate the data automatically, which would be pretty cool. However they get it, we take the data, we take all the computed output, which normally gets displayed numerically or tables or charts or graphs or things like that. But we take all the computed output, we feed that back into the AI, and the advisor chooses a tone or a style. I want this narrative in a casual style, in a professional style, in a formal style, something like that. And the AI spits back a narrative summary of it. So for somebody that responds better to, hey, explain to me what's going on, this is another way for advisors to reach them,
Yeah. No, totally. Like that storytelling, as we were saying earlier, like the fact that these systems now can both understand and as part of that produce, like kind of what seems like normal human communication is a huge deal, right? Because exactly as you said, some people like spreadsheets, some people want to hear the story of like some client that maybe was like them or is like them, right? And that's how they remember. And it changes the way that you can provide service, and a lot of this for us is just really around helping people scale the practice without necessarily having to scale as much human capital with it. And because these systems can put in a narrative for you, analyze these things, you can look at the same from different angles very easily. There's just a huge amount that you can do there that's very powerful. And I think as we've had a number of people now on the system, our system for a half year or more, and we're starting to see them really get to more advanced types of things that they can do that are just very powerful, right? Like things that you would never have the people powered resources to do yourself, right? Like you would never be able to go through all of your clients and write a different narrative for them, as an example.
Right.
Like my system could do that across 100 people and
sure,
this kind of thing. Yeah.
Right. So here's a question from advisor. I think some of this you've touched on. talking about areas of concern, but will AI robots take over the world, and will consumers replace their advisors with DeepSeek, or fill in the blank, I'm sure.
Yeah. So like I think what we've seen really interestingly, and I think there's a lot of learning from the robo advisor, I'll call it like wave or boom, if you will, from probably like 10 plus years ago now, is the a lot of advisors' value to clients is their ability to really understand their personal situation, their goals, and also like recommend options, right? So like, hey, if these are your goals, instead of doing this, maybe you want to look at it this way, and these types of things. I don't think that's going to get replaced anytime soon. And I think as people become, farther along in their careers, and frankly, farther along in kind of like their, wealth building, that matters even more and more to them. Robots may take over the world at some point, who knows? But I think what we've seen is that people, in an interesting way, the technology actually allows you to be more personal and more tailored, if you will, to the client, and really focus on, some of the personal aspects of them, right? Like if a client, whatever, 9 months ago is with you, and then they tell you whatever, they're going to a boat show afterwards, like the fact that you can now remember that 9 months later and be like, you didn't do anything dumb like buy a boat, did you? Or, these types of things, it just allows you to remember in ways that are very hard to do otherwise. And so I think if anything, we're almost seeing the opposite, which is that the personal connections are even more kind of critical. And I think the robo advisors kind of showed us that as well, right? Like there's a number of things that you need to kind of do to maintain a portfolio and things like that. But it's really these personal connections and understanding that are very valuable. What we do see, like when we started our early adopter program a little under a year and a half ago. And at that point, if I had went to any of our early adopter people and I was like, I'm going to fully automate some of this for you, they would have just been like, no way, right? Like A, I don't trust it, and B, you probably can't do it. I think what we are seeing is there are some low-hanging fruit for things like scheduling appointments, right? Where like the email can go to the client, the email can come back from the client with two options. It could look at the calendar and schedule on a calendar, right? It feels like a very natural back and forth. The admin team doesn't have to get involved. The client's getting replies right away, and boom, like things are scheduled. Like these types of things that have lower risk, not really any compliance concerns or anything like that,
Right.
are frankly easy to validate. I do think we will see more and more of those automate, but it's really so that the advisors can spend more time with clients, finding new clients, and really, with kind of tailoring for them and time with them personally.
It's such a time saver.
Yeah, it's amazing now. I think everyone knows this, right? But like the amount of time that anybody is spending in the back office at a firm is huge, right? It's like well over 50% of the time is going into that. It's expensive to go hire associates and everything else. And, there's some amazing ones out there that people like. And so, the more they can accelerate those instead of having to hire more and more people to grow their book of business is just great. And as you know, like some of those roles are pretty hard to hold people into for a long time because, some of the associates aren't great, some are really good, but then they want to become advisors or, do their own thing. And so it's just like that, being able to scale more and get rid of the work, like the data entry, the follow-up, the form fills, all of those things for people is really impactful. It also just frankly makes them enjoy their day more, right? Like even if you just take that time back and spend it with your family or whatever you want to do, like it's
Sure. Yeah, I mean, the advisor that might be spending the end of the day after market hours going through paperwork and doing follow-up emails and all these things. Imagine consolidating that from 3 hours to 30 minutes, and
yeah.
then go home and enjoy the rest of your day with your family.
No,
Yeah,
we have
it's huge.
people, like as you know, who can like meetings, right? It's reasonably common, and like they now can get out of a meeting in like 50, 55 minutes, get something out to the client, get notes in, go to the bathroom, get some water, and then even, additionally, as they get to the end of the day, they no longer need to spend 3 to 4 hours like going through all the meetings that day to get everything down. But then now that we're able to do things like, draft replies to emails for them, that like for inbound emails from clients with questions, they can then also rip through that in like 20 minutes, right? Instead of having to send it like another hour or two because a client, whatever, is looking at a new house, new car, needs money out. Like, it's hard because when clients reach out to advisors, they want to respond and be very helpful. Often the client, whatever the client's asking, it's very important to them. And on a tough schedule day, that can take, you can burn 12 hours easily, right? Or people take Friday and just do notes, or they just spend all Thursday night or Saturday doing it. So
Sure.
yeah, it's pretty pretty meaningfully changing for people.
And so obviously there's some people that have deep concerns about AI, not specifically in financial services, but more broadly, this sort of the question about will robots take over the world kind of thing. Given how deeply you've been involved in technology, do you have any of that fear? Just more broadly about society, do you think we're going to have a point where AI is really thinking so many steps ahead, it's making decisions that we feel like we want humans to make?
Yeah, I think there's definitely a fear, like with any new technology, right? Like there's good ways of using it and bad ways of using it. And I think people think a lot about like, when the super AI comes, is going to outsmart us and we can't do anything. But I think way before that, you can imagine taking some of these systems and hooking them up to something where it can make decisions and take action. And like,
Sure.
quite sure, and I'm worried that people will do that in a way where, like when I say we, like humans in general,
Right.
lose control over certain decisions getting made. And someone does it. I think it's a very natural concern.
Look,
I think the regulation is hard to go fix that, but like it's definitely a real concern.
we could make a case for why we'd rather the machines make the decision instead of us. If there was a prime directive to preserve human life and the planet, you could imagine. I mean, look at, I'm sure there are people that have fears of leaders around the world with access to nuclear weapons or something like that, meaning we fear the human decision in some cases too. And so, one could make a case that maybe it's better. Maybe some of those decisions are better in the hands
Yeah.
of the machine. I'm not sure. Back to the driving example, I think there's going to be a lot of new ground legally, not just driving, but other things too. But driving is such an easy example to look at in that we can demonstrate that whether Tesla, Waymo, others, we can demonstrate the rate of accidents per mile while the vehicle is being operated in a fully autonomous fashion is significantly lower than human
Yeah.
driver. I think that's been pretty well documented. The number I'm remembering was like 1/7 of the incidents or something. I don't know if that's current, but it's not zero. And so we do have the situation where there is an accident, maybe injury or even death, and there was no person driving the car.
Yeah.
Whether or not there was a person in the driver's seat might depend on the use case, but this is going to be some interesting, largely uncharted territory. And I personally believe we shouldn't hold back because there is risk of the machine causing a problem if it's demonstrated that the machine causes far fewer problems than the human. But that's still not going to necessarily solve a lawsuit. What are your thoughts about? You can comment on this area, or if you want to take it in a different direction, that's fine too.
Totally agree. It's going to be a challenge, right? Like I'll talk about driving a little bit because it's actually a clear example, and then even kind of bring it back to, because we see this in financial services, is like in the driving case, like human drivers are not perfect by any means, right? It's very easy to measure the effectiveness of like, let's say a self-driving system versus a human. I think you probably all have friends, everyone does, who's like, oh, but I'm a good driver, so I don't want it to drive for me, like all of these types of things. But whatever, if it's late at night or you have worse visibility, like there's just things, these systems can do. And so it becomes really interesting, right? To your point around, like if it does make a mistake, or even like when it says a mistake, like it did something that caused damage, if it's doing drastically better than humans isn't that good? Do we end up in a spot which is more of like like there's a number of insurance areas that are essentially like kind of zero fault, so like if you bump me or I bump you, it's just easier to pay the thing than it is to figure out like, who should have not bumped the person. It's possible to have some of that, but that, that doesn't go very far if someone is killed or something like that. I think we see the same, like we're already starting to see with financial services where you end up with like recommendations and who's on point for that recommendation. And, like it's even a little more challenging, I think, in our space because, a lot of it is really like, did you do the right thing at the time for the client, right? Like knowing what you knew at the time, was that the right thing given their situation, given their risk portfolio, like given the risks that they can take? And how do we do that? And so I don't know, like you're going to see, I think, a lot of change in the next 3 to 5 years in that space. What we've been doing, which is kind of a key aspect, I think if you're going to see most like systems in any mission critical area, which, and I'll call finance mission critical, is we actually like essentially keep a log and audit things. So like if there's two things and one has a different answer from something else, it's a fact, right? Like these hallucinations you're mentioning earlier, do we actually go backwards and have the log of like, where's the data that we use to come up with that conclusion, right? Or, in a car, it's like, why did the car decide to turn left to go onto the shoulder? Well, it thought there was a cat, or, like whatever it is. And so I think you are going to start to see like a lot of this more of what we would call like trail of evidence. And in the financial space, like, as we're starting to work with larger firms, they want it, right? They need it because they need to be able to, even like something goes wrong and you can say, how often are the humans messing up? And very often are like, oh, they don't really make mistakes, but like they make mistakes, right? There's like people fat finger things on keyboards all the time, all that. And what you really want is kind of like almost an audit log of like what happened, where did it go wrong? Can we put things in place to avoid it going wrong again and things like that. So I think you'll see some of that, but it's going to be very hard on the legal side. I totally agree. Like it's challenging.
Not that it was really AI, but look back to the robo-advice type solutions. There's been debate over whether a robo-advisor should be held to a fiduciary standard.
Yep.
And I think you have some of that that's going to bleed over into AI. Because AI as a buzzword became so popular, I think a year ago, 2 years ago, we saw a lot of companies sort of claiming they're using AI where it was really kind of a stretch. It was really just data mining in some way. And I was probably the old curmudgeon here 2 years ago going, I don't want to say we have AI if it's really just data mining. We waited till we had what we thought was a really good use case for LLM that, to your earlier point, that we also felt was relatively low risk to roll out.
Yeah.
Because you can imagine for us too, we didn't want to roll out with something that advisors might have trepidations over using. I think there's a good case that maybe the robo-advice solution should be held to fiduciary standard, and especially as you are getting into the realm of AI potentially making some kind of an investment recommendation. I don't think that's how advisors are really using it yet. I agree that most of what we're seeing are variations of LLMs, and I think the LLMs actually don't do that really very well at this point. They can filter lists, they can grab data from all over, but when we think about advice and wealth management, a lot of it is about how you combine investments and how you analyze combinations of investments. LLM is not very good at that type of function.
Yeah.
There are other types of AI that are, but they're not very quick in my experience. And so maybe we will see combinations of these things. Maybe we will see LLM used to translate what somebody is seeking and combining it with other types of artificial intelligence that can use data and make predictions in how different instruments combined would behave in certain environments and things. And so you might get to that. Whether or not advisors will utilize it to make selections, I don't know. I don't see us there yet.
Yeah, I think what we'll see, like here's what we're seeing already, is what people want are like, if we can look across things and say like you should consider these 3 or 4 different things, like not the answer is A or the obvious strategy is B, but more of like, are they thinking of the different strategies? And I think it's hard, like advisors often specialize in a certain area, right? Like maybe a certain type of client or, what have you. And so sometimes if they have someone who's like a little bit on the edge of that area, they want to just make sure like, okay, are we looking at all the right options here? But they definitely don't want someone to decide for them. They just kind of want to have the data at their fingertips so they can analyze it quickly. Like an analogy that we actually used when we were designing our product is teachers. Like my sister's a teacher, and one of the things we noticed as we chatted with teachers about it was like they don't want the system to like grade the paper. What they want is the system to analyze the paper and be like, yep, they have an introduction, they make these 3 great arguments, here's and here's conclusion. So they can scan it and be like, great, that's a B plus, or that's a name, like whatever it is, right? They don't want the decision removed from them, but what they want is everything at their fingertips so they can, frankly, like brain quicker.
Sure. Well, I mean, it's an amazing use case, which I had not thought of, but I imagine you could hold it up against a rubric and say, here are all the things that are supposed to be in this paper, this project. Tell me which ones are in here and have been satisfied. Yeah, I think that's pretty amazing. I also have seen there's been some application where students, I think it's geared towards college students, but I don't see why they couldn't do this in high school. Essentially is recording the lecturer and creating notes.
Yes.
He'll even create flashcards and things like that.
Little quizzes help you get like all of these things that are just
I just think, I know for me, I know it's been a long time since I've been in a classroom, but boy, that would have been so helpful. And then I could have really paid attention to the lecturer rather than trying to listen and scribble and, can't even read my own handwriting afterwards. So I can imagine how that's going to change.
There's a lot of really interesting things there. I think also for us, like financial education is a really interesting spot there, right? Especially as you have like generations, and is there something that is easier to go do with the children or the kids, or growing to get them more exposed with kind of real world things, but in a way that's pretty simple, without it being like totally.
Look at something like this. NASAA has now started in 2025 requiring CE credit for IAR. So if you have a Series 65, 66, you're going to have to start taking CE credit, and we'll start offering sessions like this in a sense for CE credit. We do it for CFP and AIF, but we'll start doing it for NASAA. But for that, there has to be some type of test, to my understanding. So imagine using AI to take this kind of conversation, create questions from it, and then be able to grade the answers for somebody submitting for CE credit. Like I think the technology is there now. Somebody just needs to cobble a couple of those things together.
Right? Like that would save hours and hours from someone.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So if you know somebody at NASAA, you should connect. Maybe they can use Zox to do that.
Yeah, I'll reach out and see if we can do it. But yeah, there's a lot, like we've seen, there's just so many different scenarios, right? Just so many, like we've been very focused on productivity, and again, like kind of client replies and things like making sure the clients are getting answers quickly and things like that. But, there's just so much. Like I'm excited. Like there's a lot of advisors we've worked with, and even frankly, there's people who are running RIA firms who literally are like, I would be an advisor again if I had this now, because like this is everything I didn't love doing, and what I really want to be doing is talking with clients, right? And now I can do that, and they just love it.
I don't remember the name of the technology exactly, but I saw somebody had released a video demo of it was a consumer product that the salesperson selling it was a robot, but it was voice. I mean, it wasn't just text. It wasn't just a chat bot kind of thing. It was a real voice, and it answered questions, and it completed the sale, and it was really impressive. I know our listeners are generally advisors, but for somebody like me in the wealth tech space, boy, if we could automate the sales process, if we had a salesperson that didn't get tired, that didn't call out sick. I mean, our salespeople are amazing, but for other companies that have those challenges, I mean, I don't know. I think if I were the customer, if I really didn't know, if I was getting all my questions answered and answered pretty immediately and fully, and like if that's a good experience for our customers who would be the advisors, I think I would make a purchase of something through that kind of process. I don't know, I could be wrong, but it seems like
I've seen at least there are some scenarios where people would almost prefer that, right? Like I actually don't want to talk to a salesperson. I just need these 5 questions answered.
Interesting.
We even see it, like one of the things we've been looking at is trying to help people fill out, like again, account application forms, insurance, annuity forms, these types of things. And very often, as you get towards the end of those, and it turns out there's like 20 data points and you're missing 4 or whatever for the client. don't really want to email them, they don't want to fill them out, but they're happy to like, they don't even really necessarily want to talk to the advisor. They're just like, look, I'll just call this thing and it'll talk to me, tell me the 4 things, I'll give it an answer, and then I'll hang up, and 45 seconds later, I'm done. There's no need to actually talk to the human. It's quicker, it's faster. I can do that on the road. Some people, there's a number of scenarios where, it obviously doesn't really replace the relationships in a way, but when you're really just trying to tactically get something done or get a question answered, some of those things, like I'm sure you've seen them, right? Like they're pretty impressive, right? When you see these things talk and everything else, like it's very comfortable. It doesn't have that weird robot feeling. It doesn't have this like bizarre delay. It's just very natural now.
Some of the challenges are names, right? Somebody's name that doesn't get picked up correctly. So there are still some we'll call it buggy things, but I agree with you, very impressive. I'm thinking about how many times I go to a doctor and I feel like I'm filling out the same freaking form over and over again, where it's got a different title, but I'm asking me the same questions. And I think to myself, why can't they consolidate this? Why can't this be one set of questions and let them populate into whatever system they need? And at least, I don't know, the doctors around here, I feel like we haven't quite gotten there yet.
Yeah, no, it's a good example, right? Like it's clearly a process that was designed because of the back end processing, and insurance needs to have certain data and certain things. And so like they're kind of thrusting that on you, as the consumer or the patient. And I think there's a lot of situations now that we can skip over that and kind of like bridge the two worlds.
Yeah. So I had asked you kind of 6 to 12 months out what you were expecting, but I do want to ask you, and I know this is speculative, but if there's ever a guy I'm going to listen to speculate on this, it's you. 3 years out, give me the possibilities. Give me the things that we haven't really thought of that aren't really on the horizon. Throw out some of your more interesting prognostication for 3 years, 5 years, whatever time frame you think.
Yeah, so 3 years is a long time in this space. I think everyone probably knows that. Like even look at where we were 3 years ago. But I think a number of things are going to happen that's going to have a pretty large impact. So I do think most people, especially professionals, like any financial advisor, is going to have essentially the equivalent of a set of agents or an agent that can act on your behalf, and that can literally be like filling out bad old websites that you need to fill out for things, like all of these different things, and you're just going to be able to like tell it what you want it to do, or even more importantly, it'll just watch you and recommend. I think one of the big things that we've seen in this current generation is there's a lot of like what people call prompting or chatting back and forth, and it's super interesting. I think they're really good demos, but at the end of the day, people don't really want it doing that. They actually want someone who can kind of go and work through these things. One of the analogies we've been using, and it's pretty common in this space, is like if you look at 2 years ago or 3 years ago, like you're getting kind of a junior high school student coming out of the AI systems. Now you're kind of getting like a mid-level undergrad to maybe a grad going. And then if you think of the point of like continuing on that trajectory, in a few years you will have a graduate student, the equivalent of a graduate student, coming out. Like these AI systems will be able to act that way. And I think one of the other things that people kind of forget is that one of the things with just software and AI systems is like you can run a ton of them in parallel, right? So it's not only like let's say there's one system that's looking at portfolios for your client and trying to figure out what makes sense or not, or should you reach out about things, or like is now the right time to reach out to this prospect, or how do you go prospect for it? I think what's going to happen is you can really start to run all these things in parallel, and that's very powerful, right? You can start to say like, we actually want to look at this 100 different ways, which again, you would just never be able to do manually today. It'd be too much work. So I think you're going to see that, and what's going to end up coming out of that is that you're just going to have a lot deeper checking on things, a lot deeper analysis, frankly, more options as an advisor to go do things. I think the other huge thing that will happen, which we just talked about, is I think a lot of the client engagement, especially in like kind of the marketing, starting to warm up at the start, doing a lot of these things like post-producing, like, webinars that people run and all that, that's all just going to be like instant free, right? Like it takes a long time right now, even to take, podcasts, to take webinars, to take any of these things and process them. And what you're going to see is a ton of customization and tailorization, basically because the AI systems will just be able to generate videos per advisor for whatever topics they want to talk about. And that will have a pretty large impact, I think, on just the way people are finding clients, the way people are engaging clients, when they're using, let's say, avatars or virtual systems versus themselves. It's going to change a lot.
You mentioned customizing, and I think you were using it in a different way, but it kind of prompted me. There are, we have these general systems, I'll say ChatGPT kind of thing, but there are AIs and LLMs specifically for specific disciplines, specific industries. I don't remember the name of it, but I saw there was one advertising or holding out that it was for financial services or something, and it said their LLM could pass the CFA or CFA level something.
Yeah.
Whereas, and they said ChatGPT could not pass it. That was their barometer. And I wonder if we're going to continue to see more specialization, and I want to know what your thoughts are about specialization. And would you say is Zox specialized for financial services, or does it have to be broader because you're dealing with the end consumer?
Yeah, so I do think you're going to see specialization, and I think what'll happen. So it's going to be interesting because the core systems are getting so much better, so much faster, that taking a system today and tuning it for a specific vertical, it almost gets washed out by the time you're done the tuning, because like it's just revved to the next thing. I think what we're seeing is that there are certain constructs and very specific, I'll say tasks. Task is almost too small a word, but like areas of work where it does make sense to tune them and even to combine them. So like you mentioned earlier, like LLMs as an example have traditionally been just bad at math, right? Like you can sit with ChatGPT, ask it a bunch of math questions, and it'll get some just wrong. And so what you want to end up doing there is you can make the LLMs better, but the other thing you want to do is extract when is this actually a math question, and then send the math question to probably a different system to answer. It's like a calculator math pretty well, right? And so I think you're going to start to see this in areas like civil engineering, which is like, can I talk with this thing and tell it the building I'm on? But when you actually get into the like physics of the building and the static structures, it's not going to be an LLM doing that. It's actually going to be like a different system building it. I think you'll probably see the same with legal. Medical, you could definitely see that. For us, it's interesting because you hit it exactly right. A lot of the challenges is less on the financial side. Like there's a number of things that we do there to tailor it, to reduce risk, to make sure that we have auditability. But a lot of it is actually just like consumers, right? And it's just like what the, like Talarisk, you have this all the time, I'm sure, right? Like how do they describe risk? They say they're comfortable with risk, are they, right? Like there's just all of these things. And so for us, we assume that we will use general purpose LLMs and then attach them to very industry specific workflows from that, right? So like we won't have the LLM do everything end to end as a general purpose way, but we will have it extract data from the client and the communications and all these other systems, and then we'll put it into a very, like, frankly, financial service specific workflows of like, money movements, account openings, these types of things, because they're definitive and we'll tune it. And I think you'll see like this kind of hybrid model more and more common, because ultimately people just want the problem solved, right? And if it solves it more properly, they'll do that.
Listen,
yeah, that's how we
better, faster, cheaper. Everybody, this is why people use technology. You got to have at least one. You might have to have at least two these days, but you got to have at least one. So for advisors that are interested in learning more about Zox, how do they do that?
Yeah, so we, as I mentioned, we work now with over 1,000 firms. Super easy to go to the website, zox.io, ZOCKS.io, info@zox.io. We'll give people demos, we'll set them up on trials and run them for no cost, just to see it. Like I would recommend everyone go try, Zox. We'd love you if you want to try us, but essentially try an AI system and see how it can help you, because it really does change the way you start to interact with clients. You can focus on them more and you can save a bunch of time. And then my email address is mark@zox.io. If anybody has specific questions, happy to answer those as well.
Well, that's great. Listen, this has been a pleasure. I can't believe we're already through our hour. You've been a delight to have on. We could have gone on for another hour, I'm sure, in a blink. So thank you so much for joining us. For our advisors, really appreciate you all as well. If anybody's interested in learning more about Tolerist, I think you know where to find us, tolerist.com, or you can book a demonstration with one of our sales folks. Happy to give you a tour of our system as well. And I think that's about all we got for today. So Mark, thank you again. Thank you so much. Zox.io if you want more information, ZOCKS.io. And regardless of where you are in your AI journey, definitely look and see how these LLM systems like Zox can help you streamline your own workflow, save you time. I think this is clearly the future, and I know we're going to continue to be utilizing AI more and more in Tolerist as well. So thanks so much, Mark. Thanks everybody for being here, and we'll see you on the next one.
Awesome. Thanks, Mark. I appreciate it. Thanks, everyone.